Hello, everybody. I just thought I would give some context on what exactly is about to happen here. So, a couple years ago, I was visiting home for an event that happens every year in the summer, and part of that event was a book sale at my local library. At this book sale, I found a lot of really old books, and I got most of them because they were all like $1 a piece, and I am a big book fan. Um, but one of them is an actual novel. The novel, as you'll hear me say a little bit later, is Bruin, or The Grand Bear Hunt by Captain Mayne Reid. This book is old, like old, like early US old. So I'm going to be reading through it all as like an audiobook because it is kind of falling apart, but it's kind of interesting. The whole book is about a bear hunt, obviously, wherein the main characters will go around the world and hunt bears. This book is so old that a lot of words they use have, or some words I'll say that they use, have taken on new meaning. Um, for instance, there is a certain word for a bundle of sticks, as it is used in the context of this book, which can also be used to refer to the butt of a cigarette, which can also be used to refer to the gays, or really any queer person in a very derogatory manner. As I go through this book, I will be censoring that and anything similar that may appear, which I don't think there is anything. I've read through like half of this book. I'm obviously starting from the beginning, but yeah, I don't think there's much aside from that. But yeah, also bear in mind this book, I'll say it in a minute, but this book is written in the like mid 1800s, I believe. Yeah. So it does reflect the culture of the time. So be warned, I guess. And yeah, I will, when I reach the point in this book where I start changing out certain words, I will make another one of these and put it in the beginning, just to let everybody know. So, enjoy. Bruin, or The Grand Bear Hunt, is a book written by Captain Mayne Reid. This book is entered according to Act of Congress in the year 1860 by Ticknor and Fields in the clerk's office of the District Court of the District of Massachusetts. Memoir of Mayne Reid, written by R. H. Stoddard. No one who has written books for the young during the present century ever had so large a circle of readers as Captain Mayne Reid, or ever was so well fitted by circumstances to write the books by which he is chiefly known. His life, which was an adventurous one, was ripened with the experience of 2 continents, and his temperament, which was an ardent one, reflected the traits of 2 races. Irish by birth, he he was American in his sympathies with the people of the New World, whose acquaintance he made at an early period, among whom he lived for years, and whose battles he helped to win. He was probably more familiar with the southern and western portion of the United States 40 years ago than any native-born American of that time. A curious interest attaches to the life of Captain Reid, but it is not the kind that casual biographers dwell upon. If he had written it himself, it would have charmed thousands of readers, who can now merely imagine what it might have been from the glimpses of it which they obtain in his writings. It was not passed in the fierce light of publicity, but in that simple, silent obscurity which is the lot of most men, as is their happiness, if only they knew it. Briefly related, the life of Captain Reid was as follows. He was born in 1818 in the north of Ireland, the son of a Presbyterian clergyman, who was a type of the class which Goldsmith has described so freshly in The Deserted Village, and was highly thought of for his labors among the poor of his neighborhood. An earnest, reverent man, to whom his calling was indeed a sacred one, he designed his son Mayne for the ministry, in the hope, no doubt, that he would be his successor. But nature had something to say about that, as well as his good father. He began to study for the ministry, but it was not long before he was drawn in another direction. Always a great reader, his favorite books were descriptions of travel in foreign lands, particularly those which dealt with the scenery, the people, and the resources of America. The spell which these exercised over his imagination, joined to a love of adventure which was inherent in his temperament, and inherited, perhaps with his race, determined his career. At the age of 20, he closed his theological tomes, and girding up his loins with a stout heart, he sailed from the shores of the old world for the new. Following the spirits in his feet, he landed at New Orleans, which was probably a more promising field for a young man of his talents than any northern city, and was speedily engaged in business. The nature of this business is not stated further than it was that of a trader, but whatever it was, it obliged this young Irishman to make long journeys into the interior of the country, which was almost a terra incognita. Sparsely settled, where settled at all, it was still clothed in primeval verdure. Here in the endless reach of savannas, there in the depth of the pathless woods, and far away to the north and the west in those monotonous, ocean-like levels of land, for which the speech of England has no name, the prairies. Its population was nomadic, not to say barbaric, consisting of tribes of Indians, whose hunting grounds from time immemorial the region was. Hunters and trappers, who had turned their backs upon civilization for the free, wild life of nature, men of doubtful or dangerous antecedents, who had found it convenient to leave their country for their country's good, and scattered about hardy pioneer communities from eastern states, advancing waves of the great sea of emigration, which is still drawing the course of empire westward. Traveling in a country like this, and among people like these, Mayne Reid passed 5 years of his early manhood. He was at home wherever he went, and never more so than when among the Indians of the Red River Territory, with whom he spent several months learning their language, studying their customs, and enjoying the wild and beautiful scenery of their camping grounds. Indian for the time, he lived in their lodges, rode with them, hunted with them, and night after night sat by their blazing campfires, listening to the warlike stories of the braves and the quaint legends of the medicine men. There was that in the blood of Mayne Reid which fitted him to lead this life at this time, and whether he knew it or not, it educated his genius as no other life could have done. It familiarized him with a large extent of country in the south and west. It introduced him to men and manners which existed nowhere else, and it revealed to him the secrets of Indian life and character. There was another side, however, to Mayne Reid than that we have touched upon, and this, at the end of 5 years, drew him back to the average life of his kind. We find him next in Philadelphia, where he began to contribute stories and sketches of travel to the newspapers and magazines. Philadelphia was then the most literate city in the United States, the one in which a clever writer was at once encouraged and rewarded. Frank and warm-hearted, he made many friends there among journalists and authors. One of these friends was Edgar Allan Poe, whom he often visited at his home in Spring Garden, and concerning whom, years after, when he was dead, he wrote with loving tenderness. The next episode in the career of Mayne Reid was not what one would expect from a man of letters, though it was just what might have been expected from a man of his temperament and antecedents. It grew out of the time, which was warlike, and it drove him into the army, with which the United States speedily crushed the forces of the sister republic, Mexico. He obtained a commission, and served throughout the war with great bravery and distinction. This stormy episode ended with a severe wound which he received in the storming the heights of Chapultepec, a terrible battle which practically ended the war. A second episode of similar character, but with a more fortunate conclusion, occurred about 4 years later. It grew out of another war, which, happily for us, was not on our borders, but in the heart of Europe, where the Hungarian race had risen in insurrection against the hated power of Austria. Their desperate valor in the face of tremendous odds excited the sympathy of the American people and fired the heart of Captain Mayne Reid, who buckled on his sword once more and sailed from New York with a body of volunteers to aid the Hungarians in their struggles for independence. They were too late, for hardly had they reached Paris before they learned that all was over. Georgy had surrendered at Arad, and Hungary was crushed. They were at once dismissed, and Captain Reid betook himself to London. The life of the Mayne Reid in whom we are most interested, Mayne Reid, the author, began at this time, when he was in his 31st year, and ended only on the day of his death, October 21st, 1883. It covered 1/3 of a century, and was, when compared with that which had preceded it, uneventful, if not devoid of incident. There is not much that needs be told, not much, indeed, that can be told, in the life of a man of letters like Captain Mayne Reid. It is written in his books. Mayne Reid was one of the best-known authors of his time, differing in this from many authors who are popular without being known. And in the walk of fiction of which he discovered for himself, he is acknowledged master. His reputation did not depend upon the admiration of the millions of young people who read his books, but upon the judgment of mature critics to whom his delineations of adventurous life were literature of no common order. His reputation as a storyteller was widely recognized on the continent, where he was accepted as an authority in regard to the customs of the pioneers and the guerrilla warfare of the Indian tribes, and was warmly praised for his freshness, his novelty, and his hardy originality. The people of France and Germany delighted in this soldier writer. There was not a word in his books which a schoolboy could not safely read aloud to his mother and sisters. So says a late English critic, to which another adds that if he has somewhat gone out of fashion of late years, there's more the pity for the schoolboy of the period. What Defoe is in the Robinson Crusoe, realistic idyll of island solitude, that in his romantic stories of wilderness life is his great scholar, Captain Mayne Reid. R. H. Stoddard. Author's note. Captain Reid acknowledges with pleasure the assistance of an American author, the results of whose labors he has been kindly enabled to incorporate with its own in the story of Bruin, or the Grand Bear Hunt. Chapter 1. Bruin, the Palace Grodanoff. On the banks of the Neva, near the great city of St. Petersburg, stands a splendid palace known as the Palace Grodanoff. It is the property of a Russian nobleman of that name, and it is also his place of residence. Were you to drive up to the front gate of this grand palace, you would see a coat of arms sculpted in granite over the entrance. In this piece of sculpture, the principal and most striking figure is a bear, with the blade of a knife buried in his breast, the haft being clutched by a human hand. Open the gate and enter the spacious courtyard. Inside, on the right and left, you will observe 2 live bears, both of chestnut brown color, and each of them as big as a buffalo. You cannot fail to notice them, for 10 chances to 1, they will rush toward you with fierce growls, and were it not that a strong chain hinders them from reaching you, you might have reason to repent having entered the courtyard of the Palace Grodanoff. Look around you in the courtyard and over the different doors that open upon it. You will again see the crest of the bear, sculpted in stone. You will see it over the stables, the coach house, the granary, the kitchens, everywhere. You may know by all of this that it is the coat of arms of the Baron Grodanoff, whose crest is a bear with a blade buried in its breast, and a human hand clutching the haft. You will naturally conclude that there is some history connected with this singular tableau, that is, the commemoration of some deed done by a Grodanoff, entitling him to use the bear as his heraldic device. This is quite true, and if you enter the picture gallery of the palace, you will there behold the deed more explicitly represented in a large oil painting hung conspicuously in the center of the wall. The scene of this painting is a forest of old trees, whose gray, gnarled trunks stand thickly over the ground. There is only a little open space or glade in the middle, and this is occupied by 3 figures, 2 men and a bear. The bear is between the 2 men, or rather, one of the men is prostrate upon the ground, where he has been struck down by a blow from Bruin's paw, while the huge animal stands over him, reared up on his hindquarters. The other man is upon his feet, apparently engaged in a desperate wrestle with the fierce brute, and likely to prove the conqueror, as he has already buried the blade of a large hunting knife in the animal's breast, and directly over the region of its heart. Indeed, the shaggy monster already shows signs of succumbing. His paw has dropped from the shoulder of his antagonist, his long tongue lolls out, the blood rushes from his mouth and nostrils, and it is evident that his strength is fast forsaking him, and that he will soon sink lifeless upon the earth. You will notice that the 2 men who figure in the painting are very dissimilar in appearance. Both are young men, and both are in hunting costume, but so unlike is their dress that you could not fancy they followed the same occupation. He upon the ground is richly attired. He wears a tunic of finest green cloth, slashed with sable fur on the skirt, collar, and sleeves. His limbs are encased in breeches of white doeskin, and his boots, reaching nearly to his thighs, are of soft russet leather, ample at the tops. A belt around his waist is richly embroidered, and the hilt of a short hunting sword, protruding from the sheath, appears chased and studded with jewels. A light plumed hat lies upon the ground near his head, evidently tossed off in the struggle, and beside it is a boar spear that has been jerked out of his fingers as he fell. The whole costume is similar to that used upon the stage, when some young German or Slavonian prince is represented as hunting the wild boars in the forests of Lithuania. In reality, it is a prince who is depicted in the group of the gallery Grodanoff, but not a German prince. He is a Russian, and the bear is the Russian bear. The other hunter, he who has given its death blow to the fierce quadruped, is dressed in a style entirely different. It is the costume of a fur hunter, a trapper of sables, and consists of skin, coat, and cap, with a strong leathern belt round his waist, and rough boots of untanned hide upon his feet and legs. The costume is rude and bespeaks him as a peasant, but his face, as the painter has represented it, is neither common nor ill-looking. It is not so handsome as that of the prince, for he would be an unskilful artist, one utterly reckless of his own fortune, who should paint the features of a peasant as handsome as those of a prince. In Russia, as elsewhere, such an imprudent painter would be rara avis indeed. This picture of which we are speaking is the piece de resistance of the Grodanoff Gallery. Its size and conspicuous position declare the fact, and the story attached to it will show that it merits the distinction. But for that picture, or rather the scene it represents, there would be no Grodanoff Gallery, no palace, no baron of the name. Paintings, palace, title, all have their origin in the incident there represented, the battle with the bear. The story is simple and may be briefly told. As already stated, he upon his back, hat off, and spear detached from his grasp, is a Russian prince, or rather was one, for at the time when our history commences he is an emperor. He had been hunting the wild boar, and, as often happens to sporting princes, had become separated from his courtier attendants. The enthusiasm of the chase had led him on into the fastness of the forest, where he came suddenly face to face with a bear. Princes have their hunter ambition as well as other men, and, in hopes of taking home a trophy, this one attacked the bear with his boar spear. But the thrust that might have penetrated the flesh of a wild boar had no effect upon the tough, thick hide of Bruin. It only irritated him, and, as the brown bear will often do, he sprang savagely upon his assailant, and with his huge paw gave the prince such a pat upon the shoulder as not only sent the spear shivering from his grasp, but stretched his royal highness at full length upon the grass. Following up his advantage, the bear had bounded forward upon the prostrate body, and no doubt in the twinkling of a bedpost would have made a corpse of it, either squeezing the breath out of it by one of his formidable hugs, or tearing it to pieces with his trenchant teeth. In another moment the hope of Russia would have been extinguished, but, just as this crisis, a third figure appeared upon the scene, in the person of a young hunter, a real one, who had already been in pursuit of the bear, and had tracked him up to the spot. On coming upon the ground, the hunter fired his gun, but, seeing that the shot was insufficient, he drew his knife and rushed upon the bear. A desperate struggle ensued, in which, as may be already anticipated, the young hunter proved victorious, having succeeded in sheathing his blade in the heart of the bear and causing the savage quadruped to bite the dust. Neither the prince nor the peasant came scathless out of the encounter. Both were well scratched, but neither had received any wound of a serious nature, and the amateur hunter rose once more to his feet, conscious of having made a very narrow escape. I need not add that the prince was profuse in his expressions of gratitude to him who had saved his life. The young hunter was not one of his own party, but a stranger to him, whose home was in the forest where the incident occurred. But their acquaintance did not end with the adventure. The prince became an emperor, the peasant hunter a lieutenant in the imperial guard, afterwards a captain, a colonel, a general, and finally a baron of the empire. His name? Grodanoff, he in whose palace hangs the picture we have described. Chapter 2. The Baron Grodanoff. In one of the apartments of the Palace Grodanoff, behold its proprietor, the Baron himself. He is seated in an old oak chair, with a heavy table of the same material in front of him. On the table is spread out a map of the world, and by the side of the chair stands a large terrestrial globe. Several shelves standing against the wall contain books, and yet the apartment is not a library in the proper sense of the word. Rather, it is a large oblong saloon, having 3 of its sides occupied by spacious glass cases, in which are exhibited objects of natural history, birds, quadrupeds, reptiles, and insects, all mounted in proper form and arranged in due order. It is, in fact, a museum, a private collection, made by the Baron himself, and the books that fill the shelves are works relating to natural history alone. In a man of military aspect, an old veteran with snow-white hair and grand mustaches of like hue, such as he who is seated at the table, you would scarce expect to meet the lover of a study so specific in its character as that of natural history. Rather, you would look to find him poring over plans of fortifications, with the pages of Vauban spread open before him, or some history detailing the campaigns of Suwarrow, Diebisch, Paskiewicz, or Potemkin. In this instance, however, appearances were deceptive. Though the Baron had proved an excellent military officer and seen service, he was a student of nature. His early life, spent as a hunter, had begot within him a taste for natural history, which, as soon as the opportunity offered, had become developed by study and research. It was now no longer a predilection, but a passion, and in his retirement nearly the whole of his time was devoted to his favorite study. A vast fortune, which his grateful sovereign had bestowed upon him, enabled him to command the means for gratifying his taste, and the magnificent collection by which he was surrounded gave evidence that no expense was spared in its gratification. It was a map and globe of the world that now occupied his attention. Could these have reference to a question of natural history? In an indirect manner they had, and what follows will account for their presence. A handbell stood upon the table. The Baron rang it, and before its tinkling had ceased, the door opened, and a servant entered the apartment. "Summon my sons to attend me." The servant bowed and retired. A few minutes after, 2 youths entered the apartment. They appeared to be of the respective ages of 16 and 18. One, the elder and taller, was of a darkish complexion, with brown, waving hair and hazel eyes. The expression of his countenance was that of a youth of firm and rather serious character, while the style of his dress, or rather his manner of wearing it, showed that he was altogether without vanity in matters of personal appearance. He was handsome withal, having that aristocratic air common to the nobility of Russia. This was Alexis. The younger brother differed from him as much as if no kinship existed between them. He was more the son of his mother, the Baroness, while Alexis inherited the features and a good deal of the disposition of his father. Ivan was a fair-haired lad, with golden locks curling over a forehead of bright blonde complexion, and cheeks that exhibited the hue of the rose. His eyes were of a deep azure blue, such as is often seen among the Slavonic races, and their quick sparkle told that in the breast of Ivan there beat a heart brimming with bright thoughts, and ever ready for mischief and merriment, but without any admixture of malice. Both approached their father with a serious expression of countenance. That of Alexis bespoke sincerity, while Ivan stole forward with the air of one who had been recently engaged in some sly mischief, and who was assuming a demure deportment with the design of concealing it. A word about these 2 youths and the object which their father had summoned them into his presence. They had now been each of them more than 10 years engaged in the study of books, under some of the best teachers that Russia could furnish. Their father himself had given much time to their instruction, and, of course, an inclination to their minds similar to that which characterized his own, but chiefly to the mind of Alexis. The latter had imbibed a fondness for the study of nature, while Ivan was more given to admire the records of stirring events, with a strong penchant for the splendors of the world, in which he felt longing to bear a part. The nature of the books which had passed through their hands, a great number of them being books of travel, had begotten within these youths a wish to see the world, which, increasing each day, had grown into an eager desire. This desire had been often expressed in hints to their father, but at length, in a more formal manner, by means of a written petition, which the boys, after much deliberation, had drawn up and presented to him, and which was now seen lying open before him upon the table. The petition was simply their united request that their father would be so good as to allow them to travel and see foreign countries, where and how to be left to his wise guidance and discretion. It was to receive an answer to this petition that his sons were now summoned into his presence.